Hey everybody, how's it going? These days it seems like every time you turn on the television or read the news, there is some politician talking about how dangerous Chicago is. It is true that there are more crimes per capita reported in Chicago than in many other metropolitan areas. Would you be surprised to learn that those numbers aren't that accurate? Chicago's Office of the Inspector General conducted an audit after it was reported by two different magazines that crimes are underreported, misclassified, or just not documented, and what they found is that there are significant issues with the statistics reporting. Ordinarily, I would go over the stats, but since they're unreliable, I decided that I would instead focus on where the crime is coming from. Starting with the most obvious place, Chicago has a gang problem, to put it mildly. According to Police Superintendent David Brown, there are currently 55 gangs in Chicago, predominantly on the south and west sides, and there are over 117,000 members. These are people so violent that they have no compunction when it comes to murdering their own members or children. In 1994, one gang made headlines when it executed an 11-year-old member for bringing unwanted attention to their activities. This was a kid who already had more than a dozen felony convictions under his belt when the gang sent him off with a semi-automatic weapon to take down their rivals. He went on a spree that resulted in a police manhunt. The gang was afraid he would become an informant and bring even more attention to their activities, so they sent two teenagers to end him. In another example of how these people operate, in July 2020, a funeral was being held for a man who was killed in a drive-by. While his family and friends were mourning, a group of people in a black vehicle drove up and opened fire. The funeral goers returned fire, and over 15 people sustained injuries. Chicago reported 105 homicides for just the month of July. As of August 23, 2020, there were 473 homicides reported for the year. Former Chicago Police Superintendent Gary McCarthy blames most of Chicago's crime on the gang activity. He was quoted as saying, "It's very frustrating to know that it's like 7% of the population causes 80% of the violent crime. The gangs here are traditional gangs that are generational, if you will. The grandfather was a gang member, the father's a gang member, and the kid right now is going to be a gang member." He went on to say, "We're not doing well because we're not getting cooperation. They don't feel protected when they come forward, they feel the police will throw them under a bus, and they still have to live in the neighborhood." It will come as no surprise to most people that political crimes and corruption made the list. Chicago has a reputation for being one of the most corrupt cities in the country. When you hear about corruption in Illinois, most people typically think of the four governors who have served time in prison: Rod Blagojevich, George Ryan, Dan Walker, and Otto Kerner, but the corruption is at all levels of government. The United States Department of Justice determined that Chicago had 1,750 public corruption convictions during the years 1976 to 2018. In 2018, there were 13 convictions related to corruption in the Northern District of Illinois, which includes Chicago. Those convictions were for all different levels of government. One state employee was an elevator foreman at the University of Illinois at Chicago, who was indicted for receiving over $200,000 in bribes in exchange for funneling the university's elevator repair and maintenance to a particular company. In another example from that year, a Social Security Administration claims specialist was found to be stealing other people's identities and defrauding the government of at least $680,000. In the 1980s, the FBI launched Operation Gaylord, which uncovered a massive web of corruption in the judicial system. They found enough evidence to support 92 indictments against judges, lawyers, police officers, deputies, and one state legislator. In the 1990s, the FBI ran Operation Silver Shovel to uncover corruption related to Chicago labor unions. It resulted in the convictions of 6 aldermen. If you take a look at the years 2012 to 2019, you see that about 1/3 of the Chicago aldermen who were elected during that time frame ended up getting convicted on corruption charges. If that doesn't perfectly sum up the corruption problem in Chicago, I don't know what does. The Chicago Police Department. They have had their hands in all sorts of crimes over the years, as it has been well documented. There's the garden variety stomping on the civil liberties of people with programs like Stop and Frisk and police observation devices, which are cameras that are operated 24 hours a day and can swivel 360 degrees to spy on people. There's the assault on citizens that some cops are doing. In recent weeks, officers have been captured on film hitting people with their batons for protesting, including at least one celebrity. The last time I checked, hitting someone for no reason was a crime, but these jerks are doing it in front of cameras. Clearly, they don't care about PR. There have been many police officers who have been in hot water for theft of varying degrees. Recently, there were 2 officers who were convicted in connection to a scheme in which they would falsify information in order to get judges to sign off on search warrants. They would then bust into homes to execute the warrants, and while there, they would steal money, drugs, and pretty much whatever else they could get their hands on. Police officers are supposed to be anti-illicit drugs, so it's surprising how many stories there are about cops being involved in the sale and distribution process. One of the more idiotic instances occurred back in 2008 when a drug sting took down 15 officers who were providing security for drug deals. They were paid between $400 and $4,000 to stand guard during what they thought were dealers making sales, but they didn't figure out beforehand that it was the FBI. One of the more egregious things police officers in Chicago do is frame people for crimes they didn't commit. It was reported in February 2020 that felony drug convictions for 12 men were thrown out because the arresting police officer had engaged in a scheme in which he would shake people down for money, and if they refused to pay, he would lock them up. This particular cop is a piece of work. In 2013, he pled guilty to stealing from an FBI informant, so his record started receiving some scrutiny, and they found that there were several cases in which people were wrongfully convicted. Beginning in 2016, the convictions started getting overturned. The 12 cases from this year bring the total to 94 convictions that were overturned. The officer was involved in over 500 convictions. The Exoneration Project said their lawyers are reviewing an additional 96 claims, so there could be more overturned. It's no wonder that people have trust issues with the police and judicial system. I could go on and on about the myriad ways that Chicago cops have terrorized the people they are supposed to be serving and protecting, but we'd be here all day. Basically, a good chunk of the Chicago crime stats you hear about are related to gangs, corruption, and police misconduct. If you want additional information on any of this, I'll leave the links in the description. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, I remain stuck in the cornfield.